Well, good morning, all of you. I'm honored and very pleased to be moderating this morning's first panel. I will not be saying very much myself, because we have such an excellent trio of speakers lined up for you. And even if Eva already said something about them, I'll briefly introduce them before letting them onto the podium. Helen Margetts is Professor of Society and the Internet at the University of Oxford. And there she is also the director of the Oxford Internet Institute. Her scholarly areas of interest include e-government, government information systems, and the possibilities for online political participation and action. Alan Chadwick, the gentleman in the middle there, is Professor of Political Science in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Royal Holloway, University of London. He founded the new Political Communication Unit there in 2007 and has published extensively on political communication in and by way of digital media. Now, Göran Therborn is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Cambridge, and his previous positions include those of co-director of the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study of the Social Sciences, Professor of Sociology at Gothenburg University and of Political Science at the University of Nijmegen, Netherlands. I first encountered his work in the form of contributions to Althusserian Marxism, but it's been a while since then. The scope of his work and his interests is well illustrated, I think, by the title of what I believe is his most recently published book, The World, A Beginner's Guide. The title of this panel is Democracy, Power and Political Participation. Now, these are major entries in any dictionary and in any encyclopedia of the social sciences. They are key terms in any serious discussion of today's society, at least at a certain level of abstraction, where social scientists in general tend to enjoy operating. Manuel Castells has contributed very significantly to an improvement of our understanding of all three terms, and he has done so throughout his career. That is also in his earlier work on the sociology of cities and urbanization. Göran Therborn is currently working on a project about what he calls cities of power around the world, as I understand it. And so we'll start today's proceedings by hearing his presentation entitled The City and the State.
Well, good morning. I'm very happy to be here and to manage it. I mean, in spite of all the conflicts sort of surrounding this event, without the event itself, of course, being controversial. I'm going to talk about cities, which is one of Manuel Castells' major interests, and where he has been a very important trailblazer for many of us. And cities have become particularly important in recent years for two reasons I would point out primarily. One is that for the first time in human history, humanity is in its majority urban, according to conventional definitions of cities and urbanity. And secondly, we have also experienced last year the return to the front stage of politics, the phenomenon of urban revolutions, something which many people, thought was something, of the 19th century. Although it's true there were some adumbrations of it in the process of imploding communism in Eastern Europe. Now, cities are both sites of political contestation, but they're also media of power, particular capital cities. And given this context, that is what I would like to highlight as one aspect of cities, cities as media of power, and then I would also look at the some dimensions of urban revolutions now taking place in the era of social media, and comparing them with the urban revolutions before the arrival of these new media, which all the other panelists are the experts of. So I would say that cities in general and capital cities in particular can be read as media of power, communicating the existing and the sort of historical geology of power in the city, in a country, in an area. And there are 6 crucial variables for this, in which cities communicate the constellations of power. One of them is the urban spatial layout. The division of the patterning of devices and connectors in urban space. Secondly, there is the arrangement of public and private buildings, and the arrangement of different kinds of public buildings in relation to each other, expressing the different kinds of power. And there is architecture, of course, which is primarily significant as a form, whereas architectural style is a much more ambiguous phenomenon. Fourthly, there is the monumentality of cities, the events, the persons which the city and its power holders want to commemorate, which may be expressed in special monumental complexes, or statues, plaques, but also, of course, in museums and other kinds of arrangement. Fifthly, there is the naming of streets and squares and of institutions in the city. And finally, there is the allocation of public amenities and public services across the city and its different populations. Now, it would take too long, to exemplify these 6 variables, how they convey political power. But let me take a couple of examples using the second and the fourth variables, which are the easiest one to illustrate briefly. Democratic politics can be accented in different ways. And one way is to distinguish polities in which institutions are at the center of political life and of politics. One of the best illustrations of this is, of course, the Houses of Parliament in London. a majestic building to the institution of Parliament, the central institution of British democracy and of British liberalism before that, before democracy, which we may contrast with Paris, which there is no institution which has a very monumental building at all. French politics, well, of course it does have its institutions, but in comparison with most other democracies, its politics is very much governed by what we may call public rallies, demonstrations, mobilizations in streets and squares. And this is expressed in the cityscape of Paris in the various places or squares, with each with a very heavy load of symbolic memory and significance. This is the Place de la Bastille, but you also have the Place de la République, the Place de la Nation, and for the right of French politics, there is the Champs-Élysées, the Place de l'Étoile, Hôtel des Invalides, etc. Paris is actually divided east and west and left and right in its assembly points for its political rallies. Another example of how cities express the different kinds of politics is Tokyo, and it's this is the new Prime Minister's office, which was built in the 1980s. As you see, I mean, a pretty nice but quite modest bungalow. But the important thing is that it's completely overshadowed by an anonymous corporate tower. It's not even one of the big corporations. I mean, it's an anonymous insurance company. Nobody even knows, I mean, what it's called. And I've forgotten it now. I managed to find out. But it's really a manifestation of a very special relationship between public and private power. If you look at Moscow and Beijing, I mean, the traditionality of communist revolutions is absolutely amazing, and it's continuing in the post-revolutionary era. The centers of power both in Beijing and in Moscow are in pre-revolutionary centers of power. In Beijing, not quite in the Forbidden City, which is a museum, but just nearby in what was also part of the closed imperial city, the Zhongnanhai area. And finally, one of the easiest ways to find out the distribution of power in contemporary Ukraine is to look at Lenin statues. West of the Dnieper, Lenin is killed off. I mean, there's nobody standing anymore. And east of the Dnieper, he's all there, all over the place, in all the major cities. This is from Kiev, where he has survived because of the delicate political balance between East and West in the Ukraine. But as you see, I mean, he got if not a bloody nose, at least sort of, I mean, a heavy blow a couple of years ago. And I can tell you, I mean, there are many more things which could be done with respect to cities as a media or power, but we'll leave that for now, and let us look at the urban revolutions before and with electronic social media. And the two best examples to compare here is Europe in 1848 and the Arab world in 2011. with some starting points in 2010 and sort of some follow-up in 2012. Now, one of the things which is noteworthy here, and that's why I put out the dates, is that there is no acceleration of speed between Europe in 1848 and the Arab world. Rather, one would say, I mean, that the Arab revolutions took a longer time to get going and to accelerate. I mean, from Tunisia to Egypt and then onwards. And this is even more remarkable if we remember that at the time of the 1848 revolution, the fastest news communication between Paris and Vienna took 5 days. And that was, I mean, for the Rothschild Bank, which was had the best couriers in Europe at that time. But nevertheless, the 3 glorious days of February 1848 spread rather early to southern Germany, and from there on both to Berlin, to Vienna, to Lombardy and Hungary, and through the rest of Europe. What were the channels of popular mobilizations in 1848 and in 2011? Perhaps the most specific channel of mobilization in 1848, which doesn't really function like that anymore in our time, was the banquets. Organized sort of dinners on a large scale and with a political content. I mean, that to some extent comparable in some small sense to the American fundraising dinners. But they didn't raise funds, they mobilized opinion. And it was not only a bourgeois banquet, which was, in one sense, I mean, the triggering events of the February Revolution. Also, the League of the Just, later better known as the Communist League, also organized a political banquet for its artisan members. And there were artisans' organizations of various kinds, student associations. Students played a very important role in 1848. Sometimes, in spite of their bans or their archaic character guilds, I mean, still played an important role. New forms of associations like mutual aid societies and newspapers. In the course of the revolution in Paris, there developed and were published about 300 newspapers. And there were cafes, and in the cafes the news were read, or the newspapers were read in public to the customers. Whereas in 2011, as I think Manuel will talk about later in his lecture, there was the importance of the new social media, but there were also, particularly in Tunisia, there were the trade unions, sometimes core groups of trade union activists in Egypt. There was international television, Al Jazeera, which played a quite important role and was actually acting with a clear political agenda. But there were also mosques and religious Muslim organizations of various kinds. There were certain interesting and remarkable similarities in the decisive moments of 1848 and 2011. The center of the revolutionary process were capital or big city street manifestations defying government orders. In both cases, though, there was ineffective, illegitimate repression, which killed people but didn't intimidate people. On the contrary, they backfired and made people even more angry and resolute in their opposition. And at a specific moment, the whole process tipped because the armed forces abandoned the regime. A very crucial similarity between Paris in 1848 and Cairo or Tunis in 2011. In both cases, there were foreign military interventions, but not in the central cases. In the peripheral one, in 1849, Tsarist Russia intervened in Hungary, and in 2011, NATO, including Norway, intervened in Libya, and Saudi Arabia in Bahrain. And finally, both in 1848 and in 2011, the revolutionaries soon faced what we may call, in a reference to Marx, the 18th of Brumaire problem. For those of you who haven't read Marx as much as I have, perhaps I should say that the 18th of Brumaire, well, it's a date of the French Revolution, but it's mostly known as the title of a book which Marx wrote analyzing the defeat of the 1848 revolution. And what he focused on there was the hiatus between the metropolitan revolutionaries and the conservative province, which in the original 18th of Brumaire in France gave the power and legitimated the power of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. And something which I think we can see in which we have seen already in the Tunisian elections and in the first round of the presidential elections in Egypt. There is much talk about globalization and global context these times. We should raise the question, to what extent, was regionality, nationality, and globality different in 1848 from 2011? Well, in both cases, there was a strong regional context. That's what we talk about. Europe in 1848, we talk about the Arab Spring or Arab 2011, not just the Tunisian or the Egyptian one. There were commonalities of grievances on a regional level, and there was the region was an important area of intercommunication. Although we should be aware of, that the severe economic crisis of 1846-48 had a much stronger pan-regional impact than the 2008-2010 financial crisis, which didn't hit the Arab world very much. And on the eve of the revolution, the predictions of the IMF for the economic growth of the Arab countries was quite positive. In both cases, no less in 2011 than in 1948, the national constellations of power were decisive for the outcome. The outcome differed in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Yemen, not to speak of Libya, but that was decided, by foreign intervention, as it was in 1848 in France, in Germany, and in Austria. It was not decided on a regional level, and it was not decided on a global level. It may be true, that there were wider repercussions of the Arab Spring in 2011 than there was of the European revolutions of 1848. But there were some global repercussions also in 1848 in South America in particular, in Pernambuco, in Brazil, and in Colombia. And in both cases, both in 1848 and in 2011, these global repercussions were secondary and non-decisive. Now, these revolutions raised the issue of the possibilities of media and in relation to the state. And here I think one way of putting it is to see this as a race between surveillance and horizontal communication. Because on the one hand, state, we shouldn't forget that states are more powerful than ever. A public expenditure of, as a percentage of the national economy is much larger today than it was in 1848. In France, it was then 10%. In Egypt, in 2011, it was about 30%. In the European Union, it's 50%. And you have nowadays electronic identifications, electronic tracking, border controls. Whereas in 1848, you didn't even need a passport, not to speak of a visa, to most countries. The counter-power of horizontal media should also, I think, be seen in relation to what seems to be, I put this forward as a hypothesis, although I haven't studied it in depth, but there seems to be a weakening and or a fragmentation of face-to-face sociability and associative communication. I think this comes out of a comparison of Paris in 1848 and Tunis and Cairo in 2011. So what might be said finally about the relationship between media and democracy? Well, in the long run, the urban media today certainly manifest a kind of long-term urban democratization or de-hierarchization. The 20th century has no equivalent, to the great Chinese capital, Chang'an, not even, to the smaller forbidden city in Beijing of the Ming and Qing dynasties, or to the Mughal fort in Delhi. And what is the Lenin Mausoleum in comparison with the Taj Mahal in Agra, or for that matter, even the Vittorino, the Vittorio Emanuele monument in Rome? So there is a certain democratization in over the long term in the constellations of power which cities convey. On the other hand, the current urban media in the short run are quite contradictory, with going in both in processes of increasing popular participation and of concern with social and ecological sustainability, but also with securitization, the seed city with slumming. There are urban renaissance, and there is also competitive corporate iconicity. I think that, and this is my provisional conclusion of this brief comparison between 1848 and 2011, that the new media have substituted for some of the old, but it doesn't seem that they have changed much of the parameters and the dynamics of rebellion. And at least in the short run, it seems still undecided whether the new horizontal social media will outgun state surveillance capacity, will balance it, or will fall behind. Thank you.